everyone. Welcome back to another edition of the Joe Interview. This is Anirban Datta, and today, in collaboration with the Penguin Random House, we're excited to host Mr. Vishal Vasanthakumar, the author of The Smart and the Dumb, The Politics of Education in India. Mr. Vishal has a master's in international education from the Harvard Graduate School of Education and has made a stint at the government of Tamil Nadu's Education Department. Currently, he's a Gates Cambridge Scholar at the University of Cambridge. So, Mr. Vishal, how have you been and how are you doing today?
Good. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I'm doing okay. Just back in India for my field work. This is the second year of my PhD, so I'm starting my field work now. So it's good to be back. It's a little daunting also because I have a lot of work to do. But excited to be back and excited to be talking with you guys also.
Like, it is very interesting to hear your story and how exactly you traveled from Kota to Manipur, and it was very inspiring to read. So before we go ahead much more into the podcast and to the interview, whatever you may call it, what was your inspiration behind writing this book, and what actually drove you to write this book and to follow this passion like very hard?
Yeah, that was, I think I grew up on a diet of, narrative nonfiction. From the time I was a very young kid, I was a voracious reader and I was reading a lot of different narrative nonfiction. There are particular books that I think really stood out to me. Saman Subramaniam, who is this journalist and this author, he wrote, I remember when I was in 11th or 12th grade, I remember reading this book called Following Fish, which was his debut book. It's about him traveling to uh, all the states across the coastline of India, eating fish and how does fish and culture kind of intersect. And I remember reading that book and just being like absolutely mind blown by it. I was like, this is something I want to do also. But then I also realized that I was working as a teacher for 6 years before I did my master's in education and then kind of switched tracks to what I'm doing now in academia. I remember thinking that there's a lot of very good work happening in narrative nonfiction, but somewhere at the intersection of education and journalism, it's missing. To bring out the human stories in education was a gap that I felt like needed to be bridged. So, like I kind of started off with the book in 2018 actually. It's taken 6 years for it to see some light of the day, but I started off in 2018, decided, okay, let me go ask some people some questions, travel around, see what it's like. Then realize I don't really have too much of an idea of it. So the inspiration has also been like, it's been continuous. It's been a continuous process of learning for it to be where it is today. So many iterations and all of that. And I realized that it takes like these kind of projects, you start with an idea, you go somewhere else. And it's something I learned from reading a lot of narrative nonfiction, like Joanne Didion. There's this phenomenal work by the author called Catherine Wu, uh, Saman Subramaniam for sure, and so many other authors as well. And that's where it kind of started.
So that was very interesting that you have talked about that you started like you have been a very voracious reader when you during the teenage years and during the initial years, which is very important in terms of education and the distribution of the quality of educations in total. So once again, I will be telling that you have been traveling across the country. Like, how has actually this has changed your perspective with related to education, so on which you have also been pursuing your PhD?
Um, well, I think it was a bit of a, kind of a combined process. I did not actually have the idea of doing a PhD at all. Like the idea of being in academia was never an option until perhaps 3 years ago. Well, I think the more I started writing the book, I started understanding that like the book has like academic uh, it has an academic approach to it, though it's not an academic book at all. And I realized that in the sociology of education in itself, there is a major gap to kind of study the things that I want to study. I was working with this political party called the DMK in Tamil Nadu at that point of time, and I kind of, you keep thinking like, what is it that you want to do? Where do you properly fit in? And I realized that I perhaps like work better in academic spaces. This also has to do with like the masters I did at Harvard, which was such an intellectually stimulating experience. Harvard, for the very problematic university that it is, the graduate school of education where I did my masters in is like a little oasis in like an otherwise very unforgiving big desert, and like it was so stimulating. There was so much compassion. I learned so much over there. I was like, I probably think I fit better in academic spaces, and I've kind of decided to just stick to that path ever since.
So if I may ask, like, did you travel across the country like before pursuing your studies at Harvard, or what is it after your studies?
Before and after, I did like actually a good chunk of the travel for the book before, and I realized like I have absolutely no idea what to do. It was, yeah, but it was like, I was what, 24, 25 at that point of time. So it was a long time ago. And it was a very formative time. So I was in all sorts of different places. I was in a music school in like Hubli in Karnataka. Then I was with like, tribal school in like uh, this area of Odisha, which has like a lot of bauxite and aluminium. I was in the Golden Temple in Amritsar. I was like, what am I doing here? I thought I'll find something, but I didn't really actually, I did find a lot of things, but I didn't know how to like, structure it in the form of a narrative or to write it in the form of a book. Harvard uh, helped me kind of build some theoretical tools and kind of help me understand what research is about and how it works. Because until then, my background's in engineering. I did mechanical engineering in my undergrad. So, like I do not have exposure to this kind of thinking or these thought processes or even the method of writing something like this. So it was quite self-taught. Harvard did help me kind of structure my thinking and also give me the resources to kind of understand who I can cite, what kind of work has already existed, and of course, interaction with like a lot of professors and a lot of my peers over there. And then I came back and then I did like 2, 3 more rounds as it was interrupted by the pandemic. I did 2, 3 more rounds of traveling and then kind of stitched it all together. But it's interesting to note that this book was also written in the pandemic. So, which is why I think you will find that I kind of start traveling and then like it kind of grinds to a halt because I couldn't go anywhere. Like, in fact, like I was supposed to write this story in Calcutta, but like my interlocutors, like especially the key person who was supposed to help me get the story, they passed away from COVID. So, like all sorts of things were happening around that time. So I also had to like kind of stop traveling to some extent and kind of rework the book in a way that fits whatever's happening in the pandemic also.
It seems that you have been following something, like actually just to, but like apart from the academic and the public discourse regarding the educations, like you've been in the form of travels as if it like the book reads more about literature than about than about academia in total, as if you were following something.
Yeah.
But apart from that, what I have observed is that, like, because I have also like traveled quite a lot in the recent years, in the 2 years. So what I have thought from what my observations from the travel, like you get to learn a lot about the local culture. You get a lot to learn about the local cuisine and uniqueness about it. So this was well articulated when you talk about Manipur, because I have been also in some certain places whose conflict situations was very similar to Manipur.
Mm-hmm.
So what have you understood by your travels in the state, and how exactly the public consciousness currently
In
is
Manipur
mirroring
specifically.
yes, the conflict situation over there? How is it actually we are diverging?
Right. Wow. That's a good question and a difficult question to answer. I think it's important for me to preface that when I went to Manipur, it was a very different time than what it is now. Like I write in the chapter also, I went at perhaps one of the most peaceful times that Manipur has known. Uh, the presence of the army was significantly lower. Armed conflict between multiple actors was significantly lower. The Naga peace process was almost at a resolution. Like the Union government was in talks with multiple factions, and they were in talks with Isaac Muiva. So a lot of things were happening at that point of time, and there was a feeling of hope. And what I kind of understood through my travels, I was in Manipur for quite a while, and as I've written in the chapter also, like kind of guided by this friend who I call M. Don't want to reveal his name for obvious reasons. He, took me around and showed me so many different parts of it. Like it was quite evident at this point of time also that like memories, feelings, they were all kind of being suppressed intentionally. So because they like, people were just like, I'm done with the past. I want to move forward. But there was clearly not like when I was also a little worried about stoking these emotions, but like my friend was like, just go ask them, it's okay. Like, we need to talk about this because we don't talk about it at all. And when they started talking about it, I kind of, back then, and I was traveling in Manipur in 2021, and yeah, mid late 2021. It was kind of evident that, like, like a lot of these feelings was just simmering. There was a lot of anger. There was a lot of, like, people hadn't forgiven or forgotten easily. They just kind of suppressed their emotion. And like the state was kind of doing what it was trying to do by, like, we will, and with this entire development narrative that we'll build roads, we'll do this, we'll do that, like, let's move into this new era by just building infrastructure, which clearly did not, reconcile with the trauma that, like, a lot of people had faced at the hands of each other, at the hands of the state and the army, and also of kind of lack of opportunities and connectivity. So it's like it took me a long time to understand, but it became evident soon enough that this is a multi-pronged, multi-layered issue, and that solutions to these are, if you kind of put one solution to it, it'll solve one problem, but it'll create like 5 other problems. And that kind of also was, like, in retrospect, that kind of helped me with the narrative of the book also, in that if solving problems in education has a very similar, a similar feature, that if you solve like one particular problem in education policy, like, you probably are going to be opening 4 or 5 more social issues. And like, we need to really consider seriously and understand holistically what the issue is, which I think a lot of people have not had the time, empathy, or compassion for, especially the state, especially the bureaucracy. The political class is a whole different debate. But the time, empathy, and compassion was very important, and I really felt that, that somebody had to do it, and I hope, like, it's come out that way. It was a very formative time being there. In fact, before I had started at Harvard in 2019, I spent like a month and a half in Nagaland, um, in Kohima, and in like a few other districts in and around Nagaland. You could see it there also, like, and the issue is not contained within Manipur itself. The Naga conflict is across borders, not just state borders, but across national borders as well. And very, very, like, I wouldn't say similar, but like very parallel issues were happening in Nagaland as well. And these things, they coming from the south of India, where, like, I think India is the north and the east have seen a lot of conflict for a very, very long time. The south has been isolated from wars. Like, for example, we haven't seen any war except, I mean, yes, colonization was a form of violence, but we haven't seen armed conflict in Tamil Nadu for like hundreds of years now. Which is, so for me, growing up in this background and then going over there and seeing it, it was very new, and it really needed, I felt like that in some senses it gives me a very different perspective than people who are deeply embedded in that kind of place as well. So just the idea was to bring it out with some empathy and compassion.
That was a very nice take. What you have what you've given. You have also visited Nagaland. You have also, like, to a certain extent, you have also visited Manipur as well. So in the book as well, I saw there was a bit of an issue regarding students as well, like where they actually gang up against each other based on ethnic identities and based on ethnic communities and those lines. So how have been, like, because you were also interacting with them as well, like, how was your experience, like uncanny experience, like, which has not been seen in the book itself? Like, what have you felt, like, how exactly this can be solved? Because you have mentioned that infrastructure cannot solve everything.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. My point in the chapter was that perhaps education is one of the most important ways to reconcile conflict like this. And this is not a new argument. This is fairly common in literature, in scholarly literature on peace education, and on education in conflict situations. That the school at the same time is an exacerbator of these things, which we can very clearly see that's happened in Manipur, where you just put students of different ethnic identities and you think that, like, going to school will solve everything. Going to school, like, and that's a larger part of the argument in my book, that we take for granted these education processes. Just sending kids to school is may solve a bunch of things, but it's not going to solve things the way we think it's going to solve. The school is not like an input-output mechanism to kind of, like it's not like we just send a bunch of kids to school. 12 years later, by going through schooling for 8 hours a day, some finished product is going to come about. Children, students, learners engage in not learning, not just in schools, but in society through their caste, class, gender locations, through their geographical locations, through the societies and communities they live in. Those are also sites of education. So I think schools have the potential to reconcile a lot of this trauma, but it needs to be done in a way where it is where like there is place for healing and for listening to occur, which is not in any way, at least from what I saw, and I may be very mistaken also, from what I saw, it's not a part of the collective psyche, where, because the idea of school is that like in school, like school is this sanctimonious place where like we shouldn't be discussing anything that is happening outside, like that anything that's violent or anything that's taboo. In school, it's all about developing the child's mind, developing the child's skill, enabling them to get jobs. That's what it's about. Like, let's leave everything else to the side. But I think the school should be at the heart of dialogue and reconciliation and listening, for which you require training, you require the empathy and compassion, and it also requires adults, most and adult stakeholders in education, mostly the school administrators, the teachers, and the bureaucracy, to be willing to have a very empathetic to this saying that like, yes, we think that you have faced issues and these are very serious issues. Let us work on it together. But that's not happening, or from what I saw, and that's not happening in many parts of the world. Also, in many parts of the world where you see armed conflict, school children and school education is one of the first places that is affected. They are major casualties. And then the school kind of becomes a place to reinforce divisions in many ways. I hope that answered your question. I don't, like I said in my book also, I really don't think I'm qualified to provide solutions to it. It requires a democratic dialogue, and first we require a very grounded understanding that schools cannot be taken for granted. They are not input-output mechanisms. They are not transactional institutions. They are, in fact, like a school is perhaps the only civic institution we have, as humans, have remotely, we are thought of that is remotely capable of engaging with learners for this much amount of time and engaging them for so long. 8 hours a day, 9 hours a day, 5 to 6 days a week for 12 to 15 years. There's no other civic institution capable of it, but we don't put much thought behind it, except like, yes, these are buildings, these are classrooms, this is the curriculum. There's a lot more that we need to engage with, and one of the hopes of my book is to kind of create a dialogue around it.
So exactly, like, what do you suggest? Because you have mentioned about the problems of it and how the traditional educational systems, let's say the classroom-based systems, cannot work everywhere, especially in divided societies like ours. This was very well captured in one of your chapters regarding Tamil Nadu, and how exactly the schools in Chennai were getting organized to school fairs, school educations, and one girl actually came up that you can actually it's better that you can speak at least communicate in English, which is not exactly a brownie points for the other parts of the society. So how do you look into this? Because this is and what are the especially what are the unique and the unifying factors behind education around it? Because in every state of the country, you see a division, you see this is getting entrenched with. And what are your observations based on this?
Okay. Oh, that is a good, again, difficult question. Good question. So, okay, I'll answer this question in two parts. The part I suppose that people would not like to hear is on the negative repercussions. Okay, I shouldn't use the word negative. Is on the divisive repercussions of schools. Schools are okay, I'll talk about schools here specifically because the two chapters that we are currently discussing is based on schools. But I also make the argument that schooling is not the only site of education. Like there are various other sites of education. But the school as a civic institution in specific, apart from a lot of things it does, it is an invisibilizer. And this is also well discussed, fairly well discussed in sociology of education, in the literature there, that like the school kind of works as a way to invisibilize a lot of advantages and transfer, privilege. Uh, like it could be bodily privilege, or it could be caste or class or gender-based privilege into education advantages. And this kind of happens in a very invisible, silent way. So, for example, if I was born upper caste, I was born able-bodied, I was born a man. If I go through a particular form of schooling, it invisibilizes all of these privileges of mine into educational advantages, which then becomes a quote-unquote meritocracy. So, yes, I have done hard work to get where I am, but it's not that the schools did help me get to what I'm doing today, for sure, all the places where I studied, yes. But what it also did was it kind of invisibilized the fact that I have particular caste, class, gender, or particular privileged characteristics. So first, the school invisibilizes a lot. And that this is again taken for granted, because when we think that, okay, let's send a bunch of kids to schools together, let's take a very heterogeneous school which has students from different socioeconomic backgrounds and all of that, what will happen is that the curriculum of the school will be geared to favor the people who are on top of the hierarchy, and students who are not over there, who don't have the same advantages or the privileges or the support systems, which plays a crucial role in learning. This is so clearly established in policy, that if you have good support systems at home, if your parents are learned or literate, your learning outcomes would be significantly more than somebody who's not. Right? Again, depends on access to various kinds of resources that you require. So if you put students in a heterogeneous kind of education setting, it is very clearly going to benefit students of who are in the middle or on the top of the hierarchy. It's not going to benefit students necessarily in the bottom. It may, but the entire institution is designed to advantage and privilege a very different kind of learning and different kind of people. And then there's this entire notion of, like, there's an ideology of giftedness that comes about, so that's an entire branch of it. But to come to the other part of it, where schools can play a role, is again coming back to what I said previously. There is perhaps no other institution that we have thought of that actually has the potential to unify, that has the potential to erase divisions in some sense. Schools have been designed over the last 150 years. The purposes of educational institutions have continuously varied. In India, back in the 1850s, formal schooling came about as a way to train bureaucrats to join the Indian civil services, who can help the British administer the country. But today it's changed. The idea of formal schooling, more or less, in the world is to provide equality of opportunity. Now, how and what does this equality of opportunity mean, I think, is a very important question, again, that we need to democratically and politically engage with. Schools have been reduced to policy objects and policy subjects. It is not within the political discourse at all. Education is a subject of policy, it's not a subject of politics. Which is why I say, so how do you, to answer your question, how do you see schools, working to unify it? I think all I can say is it has the potential. It has enormous potential because it is the only civic institution capable of bringing so many people together for such long periods of time. So then you kind of start figuring out what the dialogue should be about. How can we provide equality of opportunity better, both from inside, both from pedagogical perspectives, from policy and politics perspectives. It requires dialogue with a large number of stakeholders, and it requires streamlining, which is, of course, a very, very difficult task. But again, like I said, like, the hope is to start the dialogue somewhere, because until now it's been taken for very granted.
Also, age becomes a very important factor that you have mentioned. That as per in the book that you were writing for the history book for a school curriculum, what I have observed over there is that there were like the senior teachers were there, and there was a certain kind of like where they were actually, I cannot quote the book right now, but they were actually like somewhat telling that we are teaching this particular curriculum for a while, but
Mhm.
and how is this young kid is coming up to at our stage and teaching us, because we are already correcting copies and everything. So how do you feel that age is a very important factor in such organized setups and such
Mm.
established institutions?
That's an interesting question. By age, do you mean with reference to that chapter by the age of teachers?
Yeah, by the age of teachers as well as by the age that by the which they have evolved to a certain extent. And there were also, I have seen there were
Right.
certain regarding ideologies, contending ideologies were also were getting into the play with the change in the political setup of the country.
For sure. And this is a tricky ground to navigate, particularly. I think it's very wrong to paint teachers, especially older teachers, as you know, as these people who are set in their ways and very resistant to change and all of that. While that may largely be true, it shouldn't be a generalized figure. I have come across, old teachers who have continuously changed with the times and who have perhaps become so much better with experience. But the corollary may be true also, that they are probably just set in their ways, and like in perhaps in that particular chapter that I wrote, they were very set in their ways. But it's also important to understand that these are not, I wouldn't pin the blame just on them alone. It's the incentives which they're reacting to. uh, Especially as a, you guys as a policy think tank, you should, I mean, you would know that incentives kind of really drive a lot of decisions. Incentives drive a lot of policy decisions and individual decisions also. So the teachers who I wrote about also were more or less responding to incentives. If they were incentivized to kind of innovate with their curriculum, innovate with their pedagogy, they probably would. So in education settings, it is as much, I think, the issues are as much structural as they are interpersonal. uh, it is as interactive with larger institutional objectives as it is with personal motivation as well. So I wouldn't put this in a binary. It's not that, like, if the teacher wants to do this, they can. That's not necessarily true, because they are in a system that is so much bigger than them and that is working with so many different objectives and incentives than them. And then the institute, the structures of whatever, the school, the law, the larger education policy framework in India, it works in a very different, it works with different objectives and incentives as well. So the push and pull between the interpersonal interactions and the structural constraints, it's continuous, it's happening every day, in these negotiations, and these tensions happen a lot. So I would not place the blame on either one. But I don't, to answer your question, coming back to your question and to answer it specifically, I don't know if age is necessarily the factor. I don't think by sending a bunch of 20-year-olds to go teach kids, and replacing all teachers with like very young millennials or very young Gen Z's teachers is necessarily going to solve the problem. It's an idea, but experience plays a role in education also. Experience plays a role in teaching. So I don't know. I'm not very, very sure on how to go about this, but all I would say is it's not wise to paint this in binaries, especially about age, considering that there are so many other factors in play.
So another interesting combinations that I have seen apart from age and apart from caste about the quality of education. The combination of audio chapters like talks about the importance of quality of educations, and most importantly, if we keep your experiences of Tamil Nadu, if we talk about experiences of Kota, rural Rajasthan in the backdrop, the access to educations and the access to the quality of it becomes a dominant factor and a dominant theme across all the chapters. So
Definitely.
what are the key diversities that you have observed? Let's say in the case of Kota, where the
Mm,
students have to perform well just to have a roof over their head.
yeah.
And in the case of Rajasthan, where the kids and a girl child cannot have an access to a quality of education, they have to face a lot of difficulties to reach that level. So, what is your thoughts and perspective regarding the diversity of it?
Thanks for that question. Um, okay, I have so many thoughts right now, but I'm going to give me some time. I will ramble on about this for a bit because this is a topic very close to my heart. But so first up, it's important to understand that for it, from a history of education policy perspective in India, it was it was all about access to education, because for a very very long time, for the history of modern India, many children did not have access to schooling. Like take the case of Tamil Nadu for example, when the infrastructure for schools were being uh, expanded, they realized, especially in the 80s and the 90s, that like the government realized, especially the Dravidian, I mean, not especially, both the Dravidian parties realized that to go to school, children needed clothes, and to go to school, children needed food, because parents could not afford these things, or like your parents could not like afford to cook a meal for their kid and send them to school. So, in Tamil Nadu, you had like free uniforms. And for many children back then, that was perhaps the only form of clothing they had, right? So you had like access to education was like a very important, for obviously good reasons, was the most important priority. And then somewhere over the course of time, especially in the last 10-15 years, we have achieved universal access to primary education. This is not just in Tamil Nadu, this is in almost every state in the country, where almost every child goes to school, or like every child goes to school. So now this policy problem has been solved. So we need to come to the quality of education problem, which is a significantly bigger challenge. Because first, to define what quality of education is in itself is a very political question. And here you have bureaucrats and policymakers deciding what quality of education is. So we start off at a very base level, which is foundational literacy and numeracy, which in itself you see in India and in many parts of the developing world is an enormous challenge. Like just the ability to read one sentence in your mother tongue it takes an entire community to teach the kid. It's something we all take for granted as like educated people, but like I've mentioned, like this is open access information, very widely cited by so many people in the world, that children in India do not learn in schools. You have the statistics are not in front of me, but it's in the book. But like, yeah, to roughly paraphrase, less than 40% of all kids in India are able to read a class 2 level text, which is basically reading one sentence or like of 10 to 15 words or something like that in their mother tongue or in English, or even able to perform 2-digit subtraction. They're not able to do it. And this has been made worse after the pandemic also. Learning levels have just taken a serious plummet. So you start with and there is a lot of research, a lot of work happening in multiple governments across the country to try to improve that. And then after that, you have a lot of other questions also. So a lot of other things to solve in the quality of education. Where it becomes a very important political question is that there are some people, a group of uh, learners who are able to access good quality education, and a very large group of learners who have access to education but not good quality education, right? But the idea is that because everyone is going to school, everyone is on the same pedestal, everybody is learning at the same is at the same level of the playing field. That's, as the statistics so glaringly show, that is absolutely not true. But where in India we have this problem, we have this not problem, but this huge fervent debate on meritocracy. And it starts with this completely unfounded assumption that just because everybody is going to school and scoring particular grades, we are all at the same level and we are competing based on marks. It is Grades and marks do not necessarily reflect your learning levels or your ability to perform in particular situations. This also has to do with the fact that back in the 50s, when India became newly independent, there was a very important policy priority which the Nehruvian socialist model and the Nehruvian government did, that is to prioritize higher technical education over primary education. I'm not here to debate the merits or the demerits of it. It was an important it was a decision that was made much before our lifetime, that a newly independent, developing, impoverished country needed infrastructure and technical education, and we have no choice but to prioritize that over primary education. The repercussions of it, we're seeing it now. You have an elite group of technical institutions like the IITs, the NITs, the IIMs, etc., 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 state-sponsored elite technical institutions, which have progressed really well and have produced stalwarts. But you also have a primary education, you have a school education sector that is seriously struggling, and these are all part of the pipeline. So, like, good school education contributes to good higher education. Good higher education allows you to form an informed society, informed teachers, that allows you to improve school education. So it's very much a chicken and egg kind of situation, but that's where it's at. And like the quality of I don't need to reiterate the fact that quality of education is an obvious priority for policy. People know that, and people are working on it. My where I would want to what I would like to highlight is that quality of education is a very important political question. It is not just a policy question. What is quality of education? Who defines it? And who does quality of education serve? These are very important political questions that need to be, again, democratically engaged with, mediated, and dialogue. We all need to be in conversation with this continuously. And this affects, when I say this because education is the most significant indicator of outcomes in life, apart from, of course, place of birth, apart from your nutritional outcomes, and all of that. Education is one of the most important indicators of life outcomes, and we cannot take this for granted.
That was one of the most important takes that I've seen in the book as well. The quality of education is not up for dialogue. It's not up for negotiation to a certain extent. It's both a political as well as a policy question. But what I have observed in the book as well, it was addressing the social needs. It was also like one of the chapters also focused on the experience in drafting the book. Also the importance of a school curriculum. But what I have observed in this period is that there is a need for politicization of education. I think the whole concept and the core concept of education is related to somewhere towards the recent history, towards the political structure of the country as well. Do you think with the existing realities that are present in the country, do you think the politicization of education and the policy of in terms of education is indeed possible in the country?
So this is an important question, and you touch upon an important point. When you say depoliticization of education, again, it's a very loaded term in that. So first up, what are we depoliticizing is an important question. The particular chapter you're referring to, the curriculum, I think the things that students learn, especially like with respect to history and all of that, is of course very politicized and has been, and I would say should be politicized also, because what children learn and what people learn is a very important question. It is at the fundamental heart of the practice of education. Is the first question is what should I teach? If you are an educator, the first question you think of is what should I teach, and then you think of how should I teach it, right? So depoliticization of the curriculum is, I don't know if it is perhaps even possible, because the question of what should I teach is inherently a very, very political question, and it's an important question. For let's say you're teaching math, right? Math is not an apolitical it's not an apolitical subject. There is phenomenal work that is happening across the world on how word problems kind of shape the way we understand social interactions, right? The way we learn to do math, and it is, and so even if particular aspects of teaching math is not political, it ultimately has a bearing on on larger societal interactions, and this is something that we often miss out. That we look at all of these things as isolated, hermeneutically sealed processes. Teaching math is different from, let's say, teaching English to teaching the social sciences. Yes, in the sense that you're teaching different subjects, but they are not isolated processes. How you learn English will influence how you learn social science. How you view social science and English will affect the way you approach mathematics or you approach something scientific. So all of these things happen in tension with each other. They are not isolated statistical. They are not isolated processes. They should not be seen as statistics. There are very real human interactions over here. So depoliticization of a curriculum is a very dangerous path, I would say, to go down towards, because then there is somebody who's coming in saying like this is objective, this is how it should be, which in itself is again a very political approach. Objectivity does not exist in day-to-day human interactions, and education is ultimately a very day-to-day interactional process. So I don't know if we can ever have an objective curriculum on this, which is why I'm going back to the fact that there is potential for dialogue and which should not be seen in objective realms.
So in the initial and one of the last questions that I can highlight about the core ideals of the book and what exactly they mentioned in the last chapters as well. There are two classes of people. The one is the smart, and then another is the dumb. Where the smart has rightly secured their status and their positions, whereas the dumb actually deserves their fate. To quote the book directly. So, like, do you think this is antithetical to the core concept of education, and do you think this is actually stands in the way of equality that the humankind is like actually is juggling for a while just to achieve the material well-being and the societal order as well?
Yeah, no, I need to clarify one point. That's not completely the quote. That's a part of it. I say that. So the broader thesis of the book in itself is that education, promises to be a bridge. It kind of brings people together. It uplifts people economically, socially. But I also say it'll ultimately create a new class of people, the smart and the dumb. The smart who have quote unquote rightfully achieved whatever they have, and the dumb, and again quote unquote the dumb, who have been made to feel that they deserve their fate. Right? This is taking on from a philosopher, Michael Sandel's work, where he says this is the tyranny of merit, where the people who have achieved success feel that, like, they have achieved because of their hard work and their merit, and those who have not, it's their fault. They deserve to suffer their fate, and this is tyrannical, and this is deeply problematic. Like, that is not, and this is very impositionary. Like, that's not how the idea of meritocracy should be. Yes, we all deserve just reward for our talents and for our hard work, but there needs to be a very different way of thinking about merit. But my point again is, what happens is that with education, the current education, the way we currently understand it, through methods of formal schooling, through divisions in caste, class, and gender, is creating a different group, is creating a new class of people, the smart and the dumb. The smart who think that they rightfully deserve their success, and the dumb who are made to feel that they don't. Right, and this is kind of set in the context also, which is why I say in the introduction that this is set in the context of a neoliberal global market-based order. And I really want to clarify here what I mean by neoliberal. I don't mean a capitalistic, but just by that I don't just mean a capitalistic mode of production. I don't mean to say that capitalism yay and communism down. That's not the point of it at all. It is an acknowledgement of the reality that we live in a neoliberal order where there is increased privatization and there is a valorization of monopoly. Like, India is a great example of it. Like, you are seeing huge companies expand significantly and building monopolies in many aspects, in many spheres of social life. And that the neoliberal global market-based order also kind of really encourages privatization. And by this, I don't mean privatization in terms of infrastructure, not that railways should be privatized or that airports should be privatized, but there's also a privatization of the mind, that we are asked to look at ourselves as these individual economic entrepreneurs who are each capable of fashioning ourselves however we want, and that success and failure is in our hands. That it's not about anybody else, If we succeed, it's on us. If we fail, it's on us. And this is this narrative that has been pushed forward, not just by people talking to each other, but by institutions being measured on particular degrees of success. And this is the paradox in education today, that, you are seeing people coming in very private modes of thought, that like, I am this individual person, it's not me, it's everyone else who is the problem, and I am going to, if I do things right, it's on me, if I do things wrong, it's because someone else kind of affected me. And this kind of goes, it has multiple ramifications in society. The US is a phenomenal example of this also. You have these companies which are valued at like trillions and trillions of dollars, more than like almost half of Africa or like half of the developing world. And what does this valuation even mean? So again, like, you have this creation of this monopoly, and that success is about reaching those pinnacle levels which are very exceptional. But that's not really the case. That's not necessarily how success is defined. So the point also of the idea of the smart and the dumb, the title is to not say that there is going to be a group of smart people and there is going to be a group of dumb people. That is definitely not the intention. The idea is that education affects the way we think of success. And success, it is at the heart, and it's a very, very vital part of situating us human beings in social interactions. We do think about success continuously. We are perhaps the only animal that thinks about it that way. We think of what to do with our time, how to use our time better, use our time productively. And education has a deep, deep role in it. And we don't take that seriously enough. So I hope I clarified. I hope, I know that the idea of the smart and the dumb is provocative. A lot of people have reached out to me before the book got published and even after the book got published, saying like, I don't know what to make of this title. But like, this is, I have always stuck to the title. I think it's very important. It comes from a quote that this philosopher, Thomas Nagel, this American white philosopher, to contextualize. He wrote in this paper in the 50s, I think it was called The Virtues of Justice or something, about how even if we solve the great injustices of race and gender, we will still be left with the greatest injustice of them all, that is the smart and the dumb. So he's kind of pointing out to the fact that something or the other, there's always going to, like, injustices will keep coming up, and epistemic justice, that is, how do we provide justice to people as knowers, as people who hold knowledge? How do we provide justice to them is going to be a very, very important question. And we don't know how to solve it. We can perhaps figure out ways to solve the great inequalities that come about because of race, caste, class, gender. But do we know how to solve the problems that will come about from injustice of us as knowers, as people who hold and contain and act on knowledge? Is a very important question. So that's the whole spiel. I hope that comes out in the book. If not, that's why I think these podcasts help in kind of creating this dialogue. So I hope that answered your question also.
Yeah, that actually answers a lot of the questions of our audience as well, and the questions of us as well, where we mainly talk about the importance of education, so the access to the quality of it, and the sheer diversity of the problem that we are dealing with. Like, where exactly we actually don't know what exactly is the problem of it and how exactly we can give the solutions.
Yeah.
So I think these are some of the observations that is brought out. And thanks for appearing for the podcast, and thanks to the Penguin Publications as well for coming up with this wonderful book, which is indeed which is readable, and also it gives which is very organic, as it gives a lot of thoughts for the author. Only up, even after the book ends, it gives a lot of thoughts, around 15-20 minutes to figure out how exactly the sheer problem that we are dealing with altogether. It's a thank you for the podcast, and keep watching Geo Shots.
I'm very glad for that. Thank you for engaging with the work so detailedly also. I think it's important, and it was great talking to you.